Welcome back into another episode of Red Zone Talk. I'm Owen Burke, obviously not joined by my devilishly handsome co-host Timothy Hunt this week. I'll dive into all that stuff before we get into all the football. So obviously, you guys heard us 2 weeks ago. We're planning on doing our midseason awards. Last week came and went, and much like the Ravens secondary as of late, some miscommunication. We did not get that episode recorded on time. And then this week, Tim's been fighting a cold all week, so he is out of commission currently. So you guys are unlucky enough to get a whole another solo show from this guy himself. Another house cleaning item to cover. I was wrestling with my 2-year-old this morning, and he broke my glasses. So yes, if you see me adjusting them a ton, it's because they're balancing on my big ass nose by itself. So if you see me mess with them, or you're wondering why they look like that, that's why. So we got a lot of stuff to cover. Obviously, we missed 2 weeks of football. Trade deadline has come and went now, so that's what I'm going to focus on today. We're going to try to get they're obviously going to be past midseason awards done next week for you guys, but obviously I want Tim to be able to talk about that stuff. I've got to cover the trade deadline, so going to be a little bit harder because I'm not going to have Tim here to bounce off of and get some ideas for all these deals, but going to be a little easier. Hopefully we can actually get to a good chunk of everything that happened, at least the notable ones. I'm not going to sit here and dive into every single move that happened, and we are going to talk about a couple of them that happened the week prior because, again, no episode, so we got to talk about Deontay Johnson and some of those guys that moved before November 5th. So before we dive into all the trade stuff, we got to cover a couple other headlines that I want to bring up just to kind of get those out of the way before we dive into the meat and potatoes of everything we got to get to. Also, sorry, did not do bets for this show. I want to keep our records even. So with Tim not here and we didn't talk about him getting his bets in beforehand, we're not going to do bets this week. So if you're here for the bets, I'm going to let you know that unfortunately we're going one more week without the bets. We'll get back to those next week once Tim is back and ready to go. So I did want to take a second to talk about Thursday Night Football. Obviously, you guys are hopefully listening to this Sunday morning. Maybe you're listening to this after all the games have happened in Week 10. I'm recording this on a Saturday, so I get a chance to talk about my team. They already played their game on Thursday night against the Cincinnati Bengals. Just a quick outlook of both of those teams. That was a hell of a game. It wasn't as good as the first game, and I know what you guys are thinking. The first game was, I think it was 38-35, and it went into overtime before Justin Tucker hit a 50-plus yarder to win that game. Obviously, Thursday night comes and goes. Failed two-point conversion by the Bengals, missed onside. Ravens win that game. I was at 35-34, win it by 1 on the failed two-point conversion. So, couple things here. Obviously, we'll get into all the MVP stuff and all the awards next week. Right now, Lamar Jackson should be your MVP frontrunner in every conversation you have. I don't really think there's much of a debate. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. We'll talk about that next week, right? The issue with that being the case for the Baltimore Ravens is right now, Lamar Jackson is the MVP candidate because he's playing near flawlessly. And the issue with that is Lamar Jackson has to play near flawlessly to beat a team that was 4-6 going, or 4-5, now 4-6 going into Week 10 at home, playing against the Cincinnati Bengals, and it's just not a sustainable Super Bowl level of football that you can play. Right? I will tell you that you're probably not going to run into a receiver of Jamar Chase's caliber in the postseason, but you cannot have the defensive lapse that the Ravens had on Thursday night and expect to go far, right? Right now, the Ravens' success rate rides on the shoulders of Lamar Jackson and how flawlessly he can play football. And right now, he's playing pretty damn flawlessly. There's a reason why he is the MVP frontrunner. But again, it's just not a sustainable way of play, right? Zach Orr has been hit or miss as far as a DC goes. I liked the hire. I think I liked it emotionally coming into the year because Zach Orr was a linebacker for the Ravens, I want to say back around the 2016 timeframe. He played for 2 years. Undrafted free agent out of North Texas. Came up and played great. I thought he was going to be, one of those successors in the middle next to C.J. Mosley when Ray Lewis left. Some concussion issues forced him to retire 2 years into his career. He immediately went into the coaching staff, became a linebackers coach. Now he's our DC. In hindsight, for a team that has a Super Bowl window and has had a Super Bowl window and has failed to do so, I would say that there's 2 years now, in 2019 and last year in 2023, where I thought the Baltimore Ravens were probably the best team in the National Football League, and they couldn't even make it to the Super Bowl, let alone get there. That team probably should not rely on a guy who has zero defensive coordinator experience at any level of football, high school, college, or at the NFL. He has no DC experience, right? And you're seeing those growing pains play out on national television week in and week out. There's a lot of miscommunication amongst the secondary. Marcus Williams looks lost. Eddie Jackson looked lost. Brandon Stevens has drastically regressed from what he was last year. Marlon Humphrey has played really good. Nate Wiggins, their first round pick this year, has played very well. Roquan Smith looks slow and lethargic. And the pass rush really has. I know that anyone who watched that game on Thursday night, you're like, the pass rush was, dude, you had like 30 pressures on Joe Burrow. I get that. I'll talk about their pass rush a little bit later on when we get to the deadline stuff. But up until that game, the pass rush was not there, right? Justin or Namdi Matabike, forgot, he's changed his name in the offseason, came out big in that game. There's a lot of chat amongst Ravens Twitter and Ravens fans that this guy got a big contract this offseason and disappeared. But much like how these things go, when you get a big time deal and you're the guy that's the star highlighted on the depth chart, you're the one that's eating double teams every game, right? So, yes, Namdi Adambike has to fight through that stuff, and he did. 3 sacks and I believe 10 pressures, which is a new career high for him in that game on Thursday night. As far as the Bengals, I know what you guys are thinking. Oh, and this team played way better than a 4-6 football team should. This is just like, is Zach Taylor the issue? Is it the defense's problem? It's a little bit of both, truthfully, and I want you guys to also know when you say that team is way better than 4-6, there's no reason they should be 4-6. I want you to realize that those 4 wins have came against teams all with sub 500 records. The all 6 losses, I believe all 6, at least 4 or 5 of them, 2 of them being to Baltimore, have been against teams with winning records. So the Cincinnati Bengals are one of those teams that have succeeded when playing teams that are worse than them and lost to teams that are better than them. And that's just how it's been. And unfortunately, they play in the AFC North and they play in a very tough division. They still got to play the Steelers twice and they got to play the Browns one more time around as well, which if you get caught sleeping against Jameis and the Browns, they will cause you some issues down the stretch. So I don't think Zach Taylor is a great coach. I don't think Zach Taylor is a Super Bowl winning coach. I think he's a good coach. I would love Zach Taylor maybe as like an OC to have on my staff, or maybe a guy to try to start, a rebuilding process. But when it comes to the highest high end of football, I don't think Zach Taylor is the answer long term. To get to the game itself, I realize I've spent almost 10 minutes talking about this game already, and I need to move on. Going for 2 in the penalties are the last 2 things I want to talk about. A lot of people were asking why you would go for 2 there. Cincinnati knows at 4-5, you kind of almost need to win out to make the playoffs, or damn close to it to have a chance to make the playoffs. The reason you go for 2 there is because the Ravens had scored touchdowns on 4 straight drives. They could not get a stop in the second. And again, only scored 7 points in the first half. What does Lamar Jackson do? Responds. Absolutely unfiltered, just ridiculous football. He played flawless down the stretch through the third and the fourth quarter. The diving pick that was dropped, I don't really think that's Lamar's fault. That's just a hell of a play. I don't even remember who the defender, I think it was Cam Taylor-Britt, dropped that diving pick. That's just a great play by the defender there. So you go for 2 there, and I will tell you, flip the scenarios. Baltimore is there down 34-35. If I would want to go for 2 there I would go for 2 if I was Baltimore there as well in the same spot, because again, Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow have been tearing you up the entire game. It's one of those things where the current NFL overtime rule stands, if you have a chance to win a game right there and you feel like you have a good shot to do it from the 2-yard line, you take it. Do not leave it up to the coin flip. Learn from the mistakes that the Buccaneers made on Monday night. They should have went for 2 against Kansas City. We saw how that turned out. You could see the visible reaction for Baker Mayfield when the Kansas City Chiefs won that coin toss, because he knew the game was over. When you are playing against these elite level quarterbacks, the Josh Allens, the Joe Burrows, the Patrick Mahomes, the Lamar Jackson, if you have a chance to go win the game, right, with a 2-point conversion, a 4th and 5 from the 20, and you need a touchdown instead of kicking a field goal, try to force OT, like, you go for it, because at that point you're accepting the results of a coin toss, because if you lose that coin toss, you've lost the game, right? So if you feel like you've got a 2-point play that is a better than 50% conversion rate, that's what you do. I respect the Bengals for going for it there. As far as the penalties go, I know everyone's been looking. Joe Burrow got slapped in the face mask. Mike Gesicki got held at the line of scrimmage. Were those two missed flags? Absolutely. Not going to deny it. As a fan of the team in the Baltimore Ravens, who is dead last in points or in penalties against this year, penalties called and yardage called, you're not getting any sympathy from me there. I've watched my team get absolutely. I've watched a 1st and goal from the 4-yard line turn into a 3rd and goal from the 42-yard line this year, and us have to just pray on a 7-yard out route to get Justin Tucker back into field goal range to not make it an absolute disastrous end of a drive. So, and we got bumped out by penalties, 3 straight flags, 2 holding calls, and I believe an illegal formation. So no sympathy for me as far as flags go. The other thing is, again, were those 2 missed calls? Did the Bengals get screwed in that very play in that situation? Yes, they did. Guess what? 21-7 lead. You're driving down to make it 28-7 when you had the fumble that Marlon Humphrey forced that kind of swung the momentum back in Baltimore's way. You can't leave the game up to the refs at that point, right? 2-touchdown lead, almost a 3-touchdown lead. If you go down and score there, you can't leave the game in the referee's hands. I mean, that's the key situation there. It all dials back to those things where when you're playing, especially when you're playing a really good football team, and at any time in the National Football League, you have to play better than a shadow of a doubt. You cannot leave the game in the referee's hands because, again, just like the overtime rules, 50-50 shot, you get screwed, 50-50 shot, they end up helping you win that game. So take the game out of the ref's hands, go down, score, and win the football game. So that's where I'm at with Thursday Night Football. I'm not ecstatic with the overall state of Baltimore just because of the defense, and you can see in post-game interviews, the Ravens defense is not happy. Marlon Humphrey was not happy after that win against the Bengals on Thursday. And so hopefully some corrections still come. I think it's insane that we're 10 weeks into the season and those things haven't happened, but they got to be figured out before playoff time gets here because the Chiefs and everybody else are not going to take it easy on Baltimore if they don't have their ducks in a row as far as defense goes. So that's my 12-minute rant on Thursday Night Football. Into the rest of our headlines before we get to our trade deadline stuff here. CMC set to return this week. Should be playing today, hopefully, as you're listening to this episode. If you're listening to this before lineups set or before the 49ers go out there, I don't know what time their kickoff. Be hesitant about starting him in fantasy games, especially for the running back spot. Guys coming back from injury, man, it all it takes is, they get a 3-yard carry, 6-yard reception. He gets a little, takes a low hit from a linebacker, and boom, now you've got a guy that played 7 snaps and Aaron Rodgers his way right out of your fantasy lineup with 0.7 points. So beware. If you're that desperate and you've got nobody, start CMC, but I'm just saying, forewarning, especially with the running back position, it's one of those things where he takes a big hit too early on, especially with how well Isaac Guerrero and Jordan Mason have played to this point. The Niners are not going to run out there and just drive him into the ground with 20 carries and try to get him going right away. They're probably going to slowly ease him back into things. So that's that on CMC. Dak Prescott, hamstring injury. We're kind of wait and see. Is he going to be back? Comes out today before I sat down to record. He will be having season-ending surgery. He will be headed to the IR. So if you were delusional enough to think the Cowboys still had a chance going into Week 10 here, those chances are dead for the postseason. I think mathematically it was almost impossible going into Week 10, even with a fully healthy team, DeMarcus Lawrence, Mike Parsons, Dak Prescott included. But with no Dak, this team goes nowhere. So as much as everyone likes to crap on their QB, they're not going anywhere without Dak Prescott. So unfortunate situation, but it kind of leads us into our next thing, talking about Jerry Jones and kind of what he did at the deadline and what they did in years past. Cooper Rush is set to become the starter there in Dallas with Dak going down, and I could not be more upset for Dallas Cowboys fans and, again, just more perplexed by the moves that Jerry Jones makes throughout each season that I've watched, Dallas Cowboys operate. You'll remember last year around the deadline, they traded a 4th-round pick to the San Francisco 49ers for Trey Lance, all right? I know that Cooper Rush started 4-1 the year that Dak missed 5 games. and kind of kept them in the season while Dak was out trying to get back right before the year. And Trey Lance has not looked good at any point in his NFL career, whether it was in a Niners jersey or whether it was in a Cowboys jersey. Preseason, regular season, he hasn't looked great. I understand that. It kind of comes down to the same thing with Deshaun Watson, where you have to find out what you spent money on, right? Or what you spent draft capital on. You cannot trade a fourth round pick for a guy if he is not going to be the guy to come in when the starter goes down. Because at that point, you've now wasted it. Most teams don't roster a third quarterback, right? We've had to amend a rule for the NFL where you can have that third emergency quarterback so you don't have what happened in the NFC title game with the Niners and the Eagles last year or 2 years ago happen, right? We have that amended to have the third emergency quarterback. You cannot spend a fourth round pick on that third and emergency quarterback, right? If you're going to spend a fourth, this guy's got to play. You got to find out what it is, right? And I'm talking to a couple buddies at work, and you're like, oh, they're not starting because they don't want to, they don't want his trade value to drop. With all due respect to Trey Lance and anybody who thinks that, he has no trade value. Again, you traded a fourth rounder for him, and he's looked horrible in a Dallas Cowboys jersey. It's already went down. There's no team desperate enough to give up draft capital for Trey Lance at this point in his career. So, and just to add insult to injury, if you're ever curious about what that fourth round pick turned into, again, a lot of times fourth don't turn into a ton. Baltimore has had a slew of fourth and fifth round picks become Pro Bowlers. Not every team drafts that well. San Francisco is one of the teams that does. So that pick at 124 in the fourth round, the 124th overall pick, was Malik Mustafa, the safety, who has played a lot of minutes this year because they've been extremely banged up in their secondary. And Mustafa might end up being one of the better picks that they've had, right? We haven't seen Ricky Pearsall much. I can't rightly remember who. I think their second rounder was a corner who hasn't played a ton. Dominic Puni was a third rounder who's played pretty well. There's a legitimate chance we get to the end of the regular season and Malik Mustafa might be the best rookie that the San Francisco 49ers had drafted this year. And that is the pick that the Dallas Cowboys gave up for Trey Lance, right? And he's filling in to that, what is becoming one of the most important roles in NFL defenses today is that Kyle Hamilton. You saw Trent McDuffie kind of play last year for the Chiefs, that slot corner, strong box safety that can play in the box, can play out in man coverage in the slot, and can also is a very dangerous blitzer and usually notoriously very hard hitters and run support. And Malik Mustafa is a freak athlete. That's the guy that they traded for Trey Lance. And obviously the Cowboys may not have went in that direction, but we all know what the Dallas Cowboys may need coming in and still coming out of the offseason because they refuse to address it. That was the running back spot. So again, Jerry Jones trades a fourth rounder away for Trey Lance, doesn't give him any playing time, and then to boot along with it with not addressing the running back situation, the fourth round ends at pick 135 this year with the compensatory picks that were handed out. That pick was 124. The running backs drafted in the fourth round after one, so between in that 11 spots from 124 to 135, you saw Bucky Irving in Tampa Bay, who's had a pretty decent season. Ray Davis has had an electric Monday Night Football game, but overall hasn't been great, but still a running back. Isaac Guerrero, who we saw tore up the Dallas Cowboys of all teams on Sunday Night Football 2-3 weeks ago. And also Braylon Allen, the freak of nature, the 20-year-old out of Wisconsin, all were taken in those 11 picks after the pick you gave up for Trey Lance, right? So again, you gave up possibly a running back for the future. If they would have it could have been a shot in the dark. I think there was one other running back that I didn't list there because I haven't heard his name at all this year. But all those guys I know because all those guys have gotten snaps or were at least prominent draft stories going into the draft. And the Cowboys would have had a shot to get all of them, traded away for Trey Lance instead, and now Trey Lance is sitting behind Cooper Rush as they try to salvage the season, I guess. I don't know, folks. Not that I needed to be the one to tell you, but Jerry Jones consistently shows that he really is kind of over the hill as far as decision-making on what to do with his roster right now in the National Football League. So that's kind of where the Cowboys are at, and I feel extremely sorry for all my buddies out there that are Cowboys fans. I don't want to make it seem like I'm sitting here trying to constantly dunk on your franchise, but it's a story. And it's news because Jerry Jones has the exact same issue that he's had since the 90s, right? Jimmy Johnson came in, they won a couple Super Bowls, and he fired him because all the media are like, oh, Jimmy Johnson's got the Cowboys, they're rolling. Jerry Jones could not fathom nor stand the Cowboys succeeding and him not being the one receiving the praise, right? Jerry Jones would rather try and fail time and time and time and time again to win a Super Bowl his way rather than let anybody else win a Super Bowl and get the credit for it for the Dallas Cowboys. So I apologize to the Cowboys fans. My heart goes out to you. For all the rational ones, which if you know me personally, right, which a lot of the guys listening to this show that are Cowboys fans do, most of you, I feel extremely sorry for you, right? Now, anybody that came into this year saying, we them boys, this is our year, we're going to win the Super Bowl, I don't feel sorry for you guys. Go live in your delusional la-la land that you thought you were going to go deep this year because it never was a thing. But for those who are rational, the ones that I know, my heart goes out to you extremely because, good Lord, man, we're going to talk about it with this trade that he made here at the deadline as well. That's the one I'm going to lead off with. We're going to rotate into the deadline deals now that we kind of got our headlines out of the way. We got some time to kill, and we're going to fill it with kind of the notable deals that I've got listed and 3 trade deadline winners, and I've got 2.5/3.5 deadline losers that we're going to get to as well. So let's start with the Dallas Cowboys, right? We're just talking about them. Let's get their move out of the way first. So Dallas Cowboys story comes out on Tuesday morning that, or maybe it was Monday night, the day before, the day of the deadline, that they're going to try to trade for a receiver that they've had their eyes on for a long time. And I will tell you, it doesn't matter if it was prime Julio Jones, if it was Megatron right now, if it was Larry Fitz or rookie year Larry Fitz, it doesn't matter who it was, what hypothetical or non-hypothetical player it was. Dallas Cowboys are not in a position to be trading draft capital away for a player. This team is one of the bottom as far as standings go in the NFL, and they're going to finish so, especially without Dak Prescott the rest of the way. The Cowboys are currently 3-5, just a game ahead of the New York Giants to be the worst team in their division. And as far as the NFC goes, they're a game away from being the worst in the NFC with the Panthers and the Saints are both at 2-7 as well. So Dallas Cowboys trade their 4th rounder this year for Jonathan Mingo and a 7th this year as well. Folks, like I said, it didn't matter who the receiver was unless they were on contract for 4 years and, you got them for a steal of a deal. They were not in the position to buy. If anything, this team should have been selling at the deadline. I don't know. I can't remember how much. If you hear anything in the background, my cat's digging around in his. We left the bag of food out, and he's digging around in it right now. So I apologize for that. And I honestly kind of lost my train of thought of where I was at. Anyways, Dallas Cowboys should have been selling at the deadline. I can't remember how much we've talked about it, but CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott are going to take up 47% of their cap room next year. The only way to win when you are that strapped for cash is getting guys on rookie contracts that massively outperform the money that they're getting on those draft contracts, right? How do you get guys on rookie contracts, Owen? Well, technically, I guess I'm wrong because they traded for a guy on a rookie contract, Jonathan Mingo, but you gave up a 4th rounder for a guy who has not looked good at any point in his NFL career. Now, granted, he's playing in Carolina, 2 separate head coaches, 2 separate offensive coaching staffs, and a myriad of quarterbacks flipping in and out between last year and this year between Bryce Young and Andy Dalton and everybody else. So maybe he finds his footing in Dallas. It really may not be the worst trade in the world, all things considered. But again, that 4th rounder is going to be very close to the top of the 4th, right? Like that's a late 3rd, early 4th to get back for Jonathan Mingo and a 7th, which again, 7th rounders. You're taking a shot in the dark. Might be a kicker, might be a punter. You might get somebody of value, most likely not. So really you gave up an early 4th for a receiver, which is a position of need. But again, you should be moving off of DeMarcus Lawrence, right? Teams would have killed to land a guy like Zach Martin at the deadline. And I get that trading away those guys that have played their entire career for the Dallas Cowboys is a very hard thing to come by. But again, you For this team to have a chance at winning a Super Bowl while Dak Prescott is on the contract that he just signed, they need to find ways to become very good without spending a lot of money. And really, the only way you do that is with guys on rookie contracts, guys that you have drafted. And they gave away an early fourth round pick for a guy who, if they go out and sign anybody, Deontay Johnson, you can name any DJ Chark, any middle to high level receiver, Mingo is going to automatically go to the third and possibly the fourth receiver spot. If Brandon Cooks is back next year as well, you will have given up a fourth for a guy who may not be on the field because Kevontae Turpin has played pretty decently in relief of Brandon Cooks so far this year as well. So I couldn't tell you what the Dallas Cowboys are doing, folks. That deal puzzled me to the moon. And again, not selling any of those assets that are on expiring deals or just getting older that could go to contenders and make an impact just doesn't make any sense. I couldn't tell you what they were doing, and I couldn't tell you whether that move itself or the non-selling other guys was more baffling to me because they're both extremely baffling when you sit back and look at it. So, talking about another NFC team, a one that's actually contending and not one that is middling at the bottom with a 3-6 record. The Detroit Lions. Obviously, Aiden Hutchinson down for the year, might be back for the Super Bowl, but most likely he will not play another snap in the 24-25 season. They get Zadarius Smith in a 2026 seventh rounder, give up this year's fifth and next year's sixth. All in all, this is a great deal, right? And this is exactly what good teams do at the deadline. They were trying to keep their eye on the pass rushing market. They wanted to go get a boost to that edge rush category without selling the farm, right? They didn't want to give up. They didn't want to mortgage the house. So guys like Max Crosby, or any of those big time Myles Garrett, big time edge rushers that were possibly going to become available, they did not want to sell the farm to go get those guys because eventually, long term, Aiden Hutchinson's going to be back healthy next year. And more importantly, you're going to have to pay him, and you're going to have to pay him a ton of money whenever that contract comes up. They didn't really have the financial flexibility to go get another guy who makes $20 million a year at that edge rush spot. Zadarius Smith is a former Pro Bowler. He's played in Baltimore. He's played in Green Bay. And he's also played in Minnesota, now returning, playing for his third NFC North team. And this is a steal of a deal in the first place. You're going to see that with a lot of these, right? A lot of deadline moves this day have just become, hey, this guy is on an expiring deal. We don't really want him. Here's a sixth rounder next year, right? That's what trades are. That's a lot of what the things we're going to talk about. But Zadarius Smith is a very good player and will add an immediate boost to their edge rush and could be a very significant part of them making a deep postseason run, right? Because without this, they didn't really have a ton of outside pressure. Their interior guys have been wreaking havoc all year. And I think that was a large benefit to and from Aiden Hutchinson. And now they have a guy out there that can at least supplement in and give them more of a front where they can attack from all sides and you're not just dealing with pressure up the middle. So I love the deal for Detroit. As far as Cleveland, I think more moves like this would have benefited this team, right? I'm trying to think. I was going to say, I'm not saying you need to move off of Myles Garrett. I wouldn't have been opposed to it. There's a king's ransom that you could get for guys like Myles Garrett, right? You want to kickstart your franchise and you want to kickstart the rebuild, trying to move on from the Deshaun Watson contract and the trade that it took to get there. Trading away a guy like Myles Garrett would get you pretty damn close to being back to square one, at least as far as draft compensation wise. You're never going to recoup the money that you gave Deshaun Watson. So, but trading more guys like that, again, talked about Zach Martin possibly being moved from Dallas. Joel Bitonio, or Wyatt Teller were two guys that I think would have been hot names because you just don't see offensive linemen get moved much at the deadline. And it's always a position of need, but it's always a position of need because nobody always has five guys that are rearing ready to go at a Pro Bowl level. Both of those guys, I think, could have drawn second and possibly third round picks at the deadline because it's just such a position of need for everybody, and nobody was moving offensive linemen at the deadline like they usually don't. So, great deal for Cleveland, or not great deal, good deal for Cleveland. Would have liked to see them do more in that short-term rebuild stance if you weren't going to launch the full attack and send Myles Garrett off. So, sticking in the AFC North, we'll go over to Pittsburgh. They made two moves at the deadline. They get Preston Smith for their 25 seventh from Green Bay, and they got Mike Williams from the Jets for their fifth rounder this year. So for Pittsburgh, your fifth and seventh on the way out this year. You get back Mike Williams and Preston Smith. I like both of these deals a lot. I like the Mike Williams one a lot. They give up a fifth, which is a little high for the receivers that we've seen, but they're not on the hook for any of the money, right? They gave up a fifth round pick. I think they're paying him like $620K the rest of the year, and he signed for, I want to say 16 to 20 in New York. So the fact that they don't have to eat any of that money is a win in of itself. So I really wasn't super worried about the Steelers as a Ravens fan this year, but I will say, and I really wasn't worried up until the deadline, but they have proven that they're looking to kind of make a run this year. I don't think that they're Super Bowl contenders. I do think that they might be a very high contending team as far as seeding goes in the playoffs. And I really think they might make some things shake. But if you ask me, hey, can they string together wins against Baltimore, Kansas City, and then a team like Detroit or Philly if they make the Super Bowl? Yeah, they might shock two of those teams. I just don't see any way where they get hot enough to win all three of those games. It would be a thing where, Mike, everybody's talking about, oh, Mike Tomlin's on the hot seat. Mike Tomlin might get moved. And this guy just responds in the most Mike Tomlin way possible, which is going to win a Super Bowl with Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. So I like the Mike Williams trade a lot. Preston Smith has not played super well this year. He's had a couple down years in Green Bay, and he is a little overpaid. But I think a lot of the issues that he's had in Green Bay, and people were curious why they were moving off of him for a team that's 6-2 and still has a chance to win their division, or 6-3, whatever they are. Preston Smith actually requested a trade, and another, again, a baffling move. You're looking at the chances to win a Super Bowl. You feel better about the Packers than you do the Steelers, but the reason that he wanted out is the same reason he's been struggling, is because the defensive coordinator and the defensive scheme that they've had in Green Bay the last couple of years does not benefit him. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen Preston Smith get stuck in man coverage or trying to cover the running back in a flat. This guy is an edge rusher. Like, he's a 280-pound, basically defensive end, right? Like, he is a prototypical perfect 4-3 defensive end who has had to move to the outside backer spot because they run a 3-4, and he's getting stuck out an island on coverages. That is not Preston Smith's game. He is horrid in pass coverage, but that's not what he is. He's an edge rusher. Pittsburgh's going to put him in the ways to succeed. You stack Cameron Hayward, TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, Preston Smith. That team could get after it, man. They are going to be dangerous on the defensive front, and they're going to play Steelers football. And then that's another reason why I don't think they can really make a super deep run, because Steelers football is try to pound you into the ground with Najee Harris and Jalen Warren and a bad O-line, and then just stifle you on defense. Their defense will be very good, but I just don't know if they're going to have the offensive power to make it stretch all the way to the Super Bowl. But I love both of the deals. Definitely one of my winners at the deadline. Not one that I'm going to talk about later on, but two really good deals for, they didn't give up a ton. They're not guys on super long contracts. And I guess you're trying to make a run. So, you can't really fault them too much for that. So, next move up, Marshawn Lattimore, the Saints, and their fifth round pick this year is headed to Washington. Washington giving up their third, fourth, and sixth rounders this year in return for that fifth and Marshawn Lattimore. I love this deal. This is the Washington Commanders saying, hey, Jaden Daniels coming in, right? He's on a rookie contract. We're winning a lot of football games. I'll tell you, that team gets hot down the stretch. I don't know how they fare in a shootout against the Detroit Lions down the stretch, but playing the way they are right now and a possible 2 to 3 to 4 year Super Bowl window, Marshawn Lattimore helps a lot. Their secondary has been by far and away the worst part of their defense. If it wasn't for the Baltimore Ravens having so many communication issues, the Commanders would have the worst pass defense in the league. And Marcus Lattimore, injured or not, consistent or not, is a upgrade to their secondary. And I think if nothing else, could be hopefully a really good mentor for a lot of the young corners that they've drafted as of late in the late rounds and in the early rounds, like Emmanuel Forbes. So I'll talk a little bit more about the Saints once they'll be in my winners and losers section. But But I like the deal. The Commanders are saying, "Hey, we're gonna be aggressive, right?" Jaden Daniels has come in and played better than anybody can hope, and I think they also know if Cliff Kingsbury gets another head coaching job in the NFL, that Jaden Daniels might take a step back. That's my faith. I don't think they have that thought. I think when Cliff Kingsbury leaves for an NFL job or a college coaching job, a head coach job, Jaden Daniels is going to take a step back unless they can get another guy in there who runs that similar college RPO style offense. So they're trying to push the table chips in right now and go. Because again, do I think they can win a shootout with Detroit? Probably not. But God forbid anything happens to Jared Goff or David Montgomery. They lose Penny Sewell or something like that. The NFC is wide open outside of the Lions, right? They'll have to face the Packers or the Vikings down the stretch, but all it takes is getting hot for 3 or 4 games, right? And how crazy of a Super Bowl matchup would it be if both teams get hot and we see Commanders Steelers Super Bowl would light the world on fire and not in a good way. So I like the move for the Commanders. I like the move for the Saints a lot, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about them later. So into the Ravens trades, right? And I've saved myself a little bit of time to talk about these two and to talk about the winners and losers. So before the deadline, the Ravens traded their fifth rounder this year to the Carolina Panthers. They get Deontay Johnson and the Panthers' sixth back this year. As far as values go, what you gave up versus what you got back, this was the best deal made in and around the trade deadline. To break this down for you again, right, the Ravens are one of the best teams in football and should at least finish in the bottom 5 to 7 picks in the draft order, right? They should be somewhere between 32 and 27, I would say. And the Panthers are going to be vying for that number 1 spot, if not going to lock it up pretty easily, right? The Saints are going to fight for that spot. Might see the Patriots up there. The Panthers are going to have probably one of the top 7 draft spots for sure. So in reality, when you look at this, as far as the 5th to 6th round swap, the Ravens slid down probably about at most 20 spots in the draft from the back of the 5th to the beginning of the 6th round and got Deontay Johnson in return for that slide down in the draft. That is a steal of an effing deal. Eric DaCosta worked his magic again. That's a great trade. It doesn't matter if Deontay Johnson doesn't do anything for Baltimore. They gave up literally almost nothing. They didn't lose a pick. They just slid down 20 spots in the draft, essentially. To pair along with that, Deontay Johnson's a free agent at the end of the year. I don't know if the Ravens are going to try to shell out money on this guy. So again, for a guy that's on a rental, 20 spots slide in the draft means nothing if he signs elsewhere. If he does sign elsewhere for more than $5 million, the Ravens are entitled to a comp pick in this year's draft class. So there's a chance that if he signs elsewhere, the Ravens will have taken a 20 pick slide from the 5th to the 6th round and gotten a 4th or a 5th rounder for Deontay Johnson. Steal of a fucking deal and the best value at the deadline by far. I love that move for the Ravens. I've always been a bigger fan of Deontay Johnson. I think he's one of the better and more underrated route runners in the game, and I'm excited to see. He hasn't seen it yet. He's still playing a very limited snap count in Baltimore. Had 2 targets on Thursday night, and just one was a reroute where he slipped and the ball was thrown to him, and the other one, they threw the ball to him like on the hashes and were trying to get him to run out of bounds, and a great play was made by a Cincinnati defender. So hasn't seen the effect yet, but again, if he doesn't do anything, the Ravens lost nothing in this deal. So I'm excited to see what Deontay Johnson could do. The other deal the Baltimore Ravens made at the deadline, trading away their 7th pick, the 7th rounder in the 2026 draft class, so a year from now, and they got Tre'Davious White and a 7th rounder 2 years from now in the 27 draft back from the Rams. So again, Tre'Davious White has been notoriously banged up. There's a reason that Buffalo let him go, but has been a Pro Bowler and an All-Pro corner when healthy. His tape doesn't look great this year, but for anyone who watched Thursday Night Football, I don't need to tell you why it doesn't matter what the tape looks like for Tre'Davious White. He is an upgrade to the Ravens secondary behind Marlon Humphrey and Nate Wiggins. Brandon Stevens was great last year. He has sucked this year. And look for Tre'Davious White to come in and probably get a lot of snaps at the outside corner spot. My dream scenario is to see Tre'Davious White and Nate Wiggins lined up out wide with Marlon Humphrey covering in the slot where he seems to play his best ball. And also, going back to that Thursday night football game, real quick tidbit. Thursday night football game and the week before, when Denver played Baltimore. If you have a top 5 to top 10 corner in this league, which I do think the Ravens have in Marlon Humphrey, I think the Broncos have in Pat Surtain II. Put that guy on an island against the other team's number one wide receiver. The reason I think Baltimore handled Denver so easily is because they just waited until PS2 was on the other side against Rashad Bateman. Zay Flowers gets the ball, over 100 receiving yards in the first half. Jamar Chase lit it up on Thursday Night Football. Where was Marlon Humphrey on all the plays where he went for 30-plus yards and scored TDs? On the other side of the effing field, because when number 21 Brandon Stevens is lined up on Jamar Chase, barbecue fucking chicken. If you have a top 10 corner, put him on a goddamn island on the other side. That's my middle rant. I meant to throw that in the Thursday Night Football stuff. I had to throw it in there. I don't want Tre'Davious White to be the guy on the island. I need Marvin Humphrey to be on the island. Really, I would really hope that Tre'Davious White can return to a level of play where Baltimore doesn't need to, because they have two guys that are in that top 15, top 20 conversation, and a guy they spent a first-round pick on in Nate Wiggins. So I love the value back for the Ravens. I love both trades they make. They didn't really give up a ton, and they got two guys that are former Pro Bowlers, and I think both guys have all-pro selections on the first or second team. So into my winners and losers. Got a little bit of time here. I'm going to do the losers first because I think the winners are a bit more interesting and the losers kind of fit with where we're at right now. I'm going to give a partial loser to the Baltimore Ravens. I know I just went on a 10-minute rant about how I love both deals that they made. Again, up until Thursday Night Football, the edge rush has disappeared outside of week 4 for the Ravens. From weeks 4 to 10, or I guess 4 through 9, the edge rush has been non-existent for Baltimore. It was a very large reason why they lost the game to Cleveland, and it's been a reason of why the secondary, I think, has struggled so much, is because they're getting stuck in coverage for 5 to 6 seconds every snap, and guys in the NFL and guys who watch the NFL all the time will tell you your secondary could be the most – you could have the Legion of Boom back there, right? But if you got Pop Warner kids trying to get after the quarterback, the Legion of Boom does you almost fuck all, because – you can sit back there. I can sit in the pocket for 10 seconds. Somebody will get open. I guarantee you cannot blanket cover the guys and the athletes that are in this league for more than 3 to 4 seconds max. And the Ravens, up until Thursday night, were not getting the pressure within those first 4 seconds. So the reasons the Ravens are a bit of losers is because they desperately needed some help on the edge. They weren't able to get the deal done. Reports coming out that they had a deal with Miami for Calais Campbell that fell through late. Also, fuck the Dolphins. Actually, I'll talk about the Dolphins because guess what? The Dolphins are another loser at the deadline. You're going to see some themes amongst my losers here, and it's teams that are not good right now that didn't do anything at the deadline as far as selling-wise. And actually, that's a blanket statement for all of my losers. The Ravens needed edge help. They should have got some edge help. They didn't get it, but I like the deals that they made, so they're a partial loser. The other 4 teams right here, the Cowboys, the Saints, the Dolphins, and the Jags. The Dolphins and Jags are like split because they didn't do anything, and that's my problem. You are not going to do anything this season. You would be a statistical miracle to make the playoffs if you're one of these 4 teams. You have to move off those expiring contracts or the older guys that still have a chance to compete on contending teams. The fact that the 2-win Miami Dolphins are trying to tax on a 38-year-old Calais Campbell at the deadline is fucking asinine. It pisses me off as a Ravens fan because I really wanted Calais Campbell back. And it frustrates me for Dolphins fans because, again, this team's not going anywhere. Calais Campbell's 38. He might hang it up at the end of the year, and he might leave in free. I don't know if he's a free agent or not. Regardless, he might not be on the fucking team. And there's multiple guys, right? Javon Holland hasn't signed his extension yet. I think they're going to lock him down in a long-term deal. But they had plenty of expiring contracts to move at the deadline that you could have got some extra picks back, that you could have maybe traded at a later date, or got some of those guys that could come in and try to help save money while you're paying Tua Tagovailoa so much money. But no, they sat there, twiddled their thumbs, pulled the rug out from underneath the Ravens at the deadline, did nothing. Dolphins, losers. Fuck off. Next team, Dallas Cowboys. Again, we already talked about Mingo. I don't know why we're giving up a 4th rounder. We talked about Trey Lance, why you gave up a 4th rounder for him. Zach Martin would have been possibly the most coveted piece at the deadline. I think a healthy DeMarcus Lawrence, I can't remember if he's going to be back this season. If he's going to be back before like week 13 or 14, DeMarcus Lawrence would have been a very highly coveted guy, and another guy I would have loved Baltimore to go get. And just all those little 1 year pieces, man, you got to move off of those guys. If there was any calls about Trey Lance, trade him. Obviously, you're not looking to play that guy either. And you can't tell me that there's not a running back that was somewhat, if not available, would have been moved for a seventh rounder, right? If it was a young guy, that's the position they should have went and traded for. Dallas Cowboys, losers. Fuck off, Jerry Jones. Next up, next losers, Saints. Honestly, might be one of my biggest losers of the deadline. The Saints have 2 wins on the year, right? Remember that 2-0 start they had where they scored 40 plus points in both games. You're like, holy shit, Derek Carr, the Saints might be pretty good. They have not won a game since. They lost last week against the Panthers. Dennis Allen fired. I know I didn't talk about that, but we've talked about how he's the worst coach in the league too many times for me to sit here and waste time on Dennis Allen. So the Saints are in free fall. And that's the thing about these teams that suck. You're like, well, at least they have some money to try to go make things shake, right? We saw the Panthers last offseason. They went and signed Deontay Johnson, Jadeveon Clowney. They signed Adam Thielen a couple of years back. Hayden Hurst stopped off for a year there. They're paying Andy Dalton to be their backup. Bad teams usually have money to spend. The New Orleans Saints have 2 wins, and going into this offseason now are going to be $80 million over the salary cap limit. This team did a great job. I loved the value they got from Marshawn Lattimore. Why stop there? Move everyone. Ryan Ramczyk on the offensive line should have been traded. You probably keep Olave. Alvin Kamara probably should have got traded. The only guy I give an exception to is Cameron Jordan. He's a little bit older. I think I would have loved the Ravens to go get Cameron Jordan. I go to Cameron Jordan. I say, hey, man, you played your whole career here, right? You're possibly going to be like a 15-year vet on one team. We know we suck. We're not going to be good in the rest of your career, right? We are just in too much salary cap hell to compete. Do you want to retire as a Saint, even though we're going to suck the next couple of years? Or do you want us to give you a chance to go win a ring and go win some football games late in your career, and we'll trade you to a contender, right? I give him that option. If he wants to stay, cool. If he wants out, trade him. He's another guy that should have got moved, right? Demario Davis, their middle linebacker, should have got moved. You're $80 million over the cap, and your football team fucking sucks, and you don't have a head coach. Why are you not selling at the deadline? Great trade on Lattimore. Why stop there? Saints, losers. Moving on. Next 2 teams. I kind of already covered the Dolphins. The Jacksonville Jaguars are another team that kind of fall into that same boat. Your team is not good right now. Doug Peterson probably won't be the head coach next year. And there are some 1-year deals that you could have moved off. Again, another guy that would have been highly coveted at the deadline. Brandon Scherf, your right guard, would have been one of the most, if not the most coveted guy at the deadline. Ronald Darby in your secondary on a 1-year contract. Had a great year in Baltimore last year. Hell, I would have fucking taken him back whether we got Tre'Davious White or not. If your football team sucks, but you still feel like you have some faith in the next 2 to 3 years, doesn't mean sell your best players, right? I'm not saying go trade Josh Hines Allen, go trade Travis Etienne. Trade the guys that possibly are going to leave in free agency, right? Go get that 4th, 5th round pick. Maybe you can bundle that up and move into the 3rd. Maybe you draft a guy like Malik Mustafa, right? There are talented guys. 4th round picks, I think, are some of the most valuable picks in the league because I think you have a very solid shot of getting a very talented guy in the 4th round, right? Recent picks, the running backs I listed earlier on the show, right? Braylon Allen was a 4th round pick. Malik Mustafa was a 4th round pick. Matt Judon once upon a time was a 4th round pick. There have been plenty of examples of 4th round picks excelling, and if you could have sold off Ronald Darby and somebody else to go get a 5th and a 6th to possibly move into the 4th or get a 4th, it would have been something that was, I heard a weird noise. Sorry about that. It's something that you should have done at the deadline, right? So that's another reason why the Dolphins Jags are losers for me. So next up, let's take a little bit of time and talk about our winners at the deadline. The Detroit Lions listed as a winner. They didn't need to make a lot of moves. They had one move to make, and it was edge rush help. They went and got Zadarius Smith. That's a win. They did not mortgage the future, didn't mortgage the house to go get it done. I like the trade that they made, and I think it was honestly the perfect deal they could have made at the deadline. So another winner for you, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Again, Am I confident that this team is going to go win a Super Bowl or compete for a Super Bowl this year? No. I think both trades they made were good. They're not going to hinder them very long term, which is very smart because whether it's Justin Fields or Russell Wilson, they're going to have to pay a quarterback if one of these two guys is the guy. Um, and if you can't deny a team being 6-2 and playing as good a football as they are right now, right? Again, I may not believe in them being Super Bowl contenders in the long run, but again, all you got to do is get hot for 4 games down the stretch and you're in. So I think they did a good job for a team that might be contending, but really not, by getting some guys that are talented and might help them make that push without, again, mortgaging the future and what's going to come, what's going to be in years to come for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And again, another trade we already talked about. I really liked what the Commanders did, right? And I think more so than the Marshawn Lattimore deal itself. And I don't feel like they didn't give up a ton for it. Well, they gave up a bit, but to me, the symbolism of our rookie quarterbacks playing well. We have got 5 years before we've got to hand out a contract extension to this guy, right? 5 seasons. We are going to push our chips in from day one, right? They're not going to wait until year 4. We're like, all right, we got a 5th-year option. It's going to be expensive as hell. And then we got to extend this kid, or we're going to extend him without doing the 5th-year option. Oh, we're going to push our chips in now. They said, hey, man, he's fucking winning football games right now. Outside of the Detroit Lions, the NFC is wide open. The NFC East is wide open. They have a chance to be a top 4 seed. And their front office, free of Dan Snyder and all of his horse shit on and off the field, said, we're here. If this kid's going to win us football games, we're going to back him up and we're going to go get some guys to help him win football games. I love that from an organization. And that is how it should be. If your guy is on a rookie contract at the quarterback spot and he is winning football games, you push your fucking chips in. If you feel like you have a legitimate chance to compete or possibly win a Super Bowl when you're only paying your quarterback 7 to 8, or 7 to 12 to $15 million, you push those fucking chips in. Because once you pay that guy 30, 40, 50, possibly 60 and $70 million a year, it becomes much, much harder to win those games and to win the big game in the Super Bowl. The Chiefs, really the only team that have been able to overcome that in the last couple of years, right? And I think it's something that has hindered the Ravens, right? Because Lamar Jackson next year gets worse. I think his cap hit skyrockets to about $70 million, right? Which makes 2019 last year, and if our defense screws us this year, is going to sting so much because ask the Dallas Cowboys how hard it is to win football games when you have 1 or 2 guys that take up 30 to 40 to 50% of your salary cap. So that's the winners and losers at the deadline. Recap on the winners: Lions, Steelers, Commanders. Love the deals that all 3 of those teams made. Losers at the deadline: the Cowboys, not only not selling, why are we trading a 4th rounder for Jonathan Mingo? And the other 3 losers that I have: Saints, Dolphins, Jags. You're bad teams. You might not be bad next year, but you can definitely sell off some of those smaller contracts to go get some capital for the guys that are going to leave in the offseason anyways, right? So those are my 3 other losers. And again, partial loser are the Ravens. Really needed to pick up an edge rush, but again, another loser in the Miami Dolphins pulled the rug on them at the deadline for Calais Campbell. So that's going to do it for the solo show, folks. I think that was a lot sloppier and an unkempt show than my first solo show was, but that's what happens when you catch me after a heart palpitation filled Thursday night football game between the Ravens and the Bengals, and me trying to have to talk about all the trade deadline stuff without my co-host to keep me on the right path, I guess you'll say, right? Does a good job of keeping me in check. He was sorely missed this week. Can't wait to get back in here with Tim next week. Right, I have not discussed this with him. Right now, the plan still be trying to get our midseason awards in. Obviously, we're going to be going into week 11 at that point, but they're called midseason. It's not the exact halfway. There is no halfway point with 17, right? We can fit midseason awards in week 8, 9, 10, or 11. Is it socially acceptable? I don't know. Are we going to do it? Absolutely. So we'll catch you next week. Try to get you guys an episode hopefully before Saturday, but we definitely have been trending towards the Saturday recordings. Tim is really busy throughout the weeknights. He's got playing golf. He's spending time with his wife. I've got a 2-year-old and a fiance that are taking a nap right about now. So life gets crazy. We're still trying to put out the show for you guys. So let us know if there's anything you want to hear. If you want to hear us, hey, man, you never talk about my favorite team, right? Talk about the Raiders. Boy, it'll be a painful 10 minutes, but we'll talk about the Raiders, right? Give us some fan questions, anything you guys want to do. Make sure you're tapped in on all of our social medias. But with that, that's going to cover it for this week's episode of Red Zone Talk. Until next week, stay safe, stay healthy. We'll see you then.